And joining me now live from Thuringen in Germany to talk about this further is political analyst Fahim Saadat. Fahim, thank you so much for joining us once again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So now, Taliban and Western officials are meeting in Oslo, Norway, to discuss the catastrophe that the country has witnessed. What are the major developments regarding these talks?
Well, these talks itself is a major development. It is the first time for the Taliban, after coming to power, to have a European tour, and also the first time for the Taliban and the Afghan civil society, the ones who are inside the country and the ones who are outside the country, to come together and exchange views. At the same time, the Western countries, along with the US, is meeting Taliban, and the Taliban are meeting the Western important countries. It also apparently seems the Taliban are having selective concessions, as it's heard that they have promised the re-establishment of Women's Affairs Ministry, and also calls have been made to release the 4 women protests or the women activists who were detained or abducted in the protest days ago. So these are all the developments that are happening. But more importantly, that the understanding that is being developed here between the Taliban and the civil society and the Western countries and the Taliban regarding the humanitarian issue, inclusivity, human rights, women's rights, and education for girls, the main topics that are being discussed, and a certain level of understanding which is going to be developed are all the important things that has happened so far.
So when you talk about that, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is, of course, the main talking point, and many international players, agencies have voiced concerns. So what can we really see in terms of the humanitarian approach for Afghanistan through these talks?
I think the Taliban would definitely stress on the frozen assets of the Afghans from the US and also from the World Bank and IMF. The release of those frozen assets are important steps. Also, the modalities of delivering the aid, and as we all know, the UN has asked for almost 5 billion in humanitarian assistance. So delivering this aid through the Taliban, or with the cooperation of the Taliban, or without the Taliban, with other mechanisms, are the things which will be discussed, which are important for the effective delivery of the humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. Also, I believe that the Western countries would stress on the need for further inclusivity and respect for human rights at the expense or in return for humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. But what is immediately important, I think, from the side of the Taliban, to ask for the non-politicization of the humanitarian aid. This has to be distinguished according to them, because the humanitarian need is an immediate need, and political legitimacy and recognition is a process that is going to take place along with the demands that the Western countries are having.
So what can you tell us about the so-called progress that the Taliban is making in terms of inclusivity and respect for human rights, in order for them to say that they want the depoliticization of this aid? But how well do you think the international community is going to react to it when we're clearly, based on what we're seeing, do you think there has been an improvement in terms of inclusivity right now in Afghanistan under this current regime?
Well, it depends from which perspective do you define inclusivity. If you look at the definition of inclusivity according to the Taliban, they are convinced that they have definitely given some senior and important positions to non-Pashtuns, to other minorities, and other minorities are there in civilian government and as well as in the military. And they say that we will not give senior positions to the ex-officials or the sort of famous faces of Afghanistan, which were in the 20 years. But at the same time, the Western definition of inclusivity is a bit different, and they are not convinced with the level of inclusivity that the Taliban are projecting at the moment, particularly with women's diminished from the public domain and employment. So I think in order to come into agreement of the definition of inclusivity, there is nothing that's sought yet between the Taliban and the international community.
So, so one last thing, Fahim. But with the situation now, ever since the United States departed, the situation in Afghanistan, from what we have heard, has deteriorated. So, what is the general situation right now? You would say, what is the climate like over there? How are people faring over there? And what needs to be improved right now?
Well, the winter is looming. There is snow across Afghanistan. The climate is very dry and cool. People are already in poverty. The situation is dire. The humanitarian aid that is going on into Afghanistan on and off is not enough. Unemployment is at its peak, and people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. The private sector is collapsing. There needs to be something injected, some sort of liquidity, so that it restarts functioning. The overall situation is grim, and I think the humanitarian assistance needs to be increased and needs to be delivered as soon as it is possible by the international community.
Indeed. Fahim Saadab, thank you so much for taking out the time to speak to us and informing us about this catastrophic situation right now in Afghanistan. We hope it gets better. Thank you so much for taking out the time.